Welcome back to another Old Mutual Wealth Coffee Chat, where I'm joined again by Tiaan Herselman, Head of Old Mutual Wealth Advice and Proposition Marketing, where today we look at the importance of a name. What's in a name, especially in the investment context? We know that there's been a lot of articles written recently around longevity rates, extending retirement as long as possible, but sometimes the most well-laid plans go awry, and people fail to nominate beneficiaries and ensure that beneficiaries are nominated on their investment contracts. Tiaan, it's always good to have you here. It's interesting to note that the FSCA was telling us in 2022 that over 80 billion rand was in unpaid claims. And we know that 15% of South Africans pass away without having a will. Now, if we bring this into the investment context, it's so important for clients to have beneficiaries on their contracts, but different investment products treat beneficiaries differently. Expand on that.
Thanks, Dave. Estate planning is such an important and often overlooked part of financial planning, and key to this is beneficiary nominations on investments and other policies. So I thought before we get going, let's maybe unpack it in a bit more detail. Now, firstly, there are pre-retirement funds. These are things like pension funds, provident funds, preservation funds, and retirement annuities. However, even if you nominate someone on these investments, the fund trustees have 12 months to decide who the funds are actually allocated to, based on who was actually financially dependent on you in the event of your passing, because of a law referred to as Section 37C of the Pension Funds Act. Secondly, we then have life insurance policies. Now here, you can nominate anyone, like your spouse, your children, or even a trust for minor children. And then we have business assurance policies in third place. These are like buy and sell or key person policies where you can nominate the beneficiaries. However, a very important factor here is how these policies are structured to ensure that you can actually save on estate duty. And typically, these are used to make sure the business partners or the company can easily buy out the deceased partner's share or replace a key person in the business. And then we have something a bit more technical. Then we have endowments and sinking funds. Now, these are a bit more technical as both of these investments are actually very similar. However, there is a key benefit in that sinking funds offer many of the same benefits as endowments, but the key difference is that an endowment actually has a life assured, while a sinking fund does not. So on an endowment, one usually appoints also a beneficiary, but for proceeds, who will receive the proceeds of the policy when the life assured normally passes away or when the policy terminates. On the other hand, with a sinking fund, there is no life assured, and the investor only needs to nominate a beneficiary for ownership, who will then become the new owner of the policy when the investor dies. And then we get to something that's very common at Old Mutual Wealth. A big part of our client base invests into post-retirement investments like living annuities. Now here you can nominate natural persons, and in most cases people nominate natural persons as beneficiaries, or in some cases you can even nominate a trust. And these, if it's a natural person, they will directly inherit the funds, unlike your pre-retirement funds, where there's first the board of trustees that need to make sure that there wasn't somebody financially independent on you. With living annuities, whoever the nomination is, it would go to that person if they were still alive at that point in time. And then we get to the last portion, which is tax-free investments, where there's a bit of an asterisk, Dave, because you can nominate a beneficiary on a tax-free savings account or tax-free investment, but only if it is linked to a company with a life license. So as an example, on Old Mutual Wealth, we have a life license, so here you can nominate a beneficiary. However, if the tax-free savings account is on a list platform or an investment platform, you can't. It actually has to be administered through your will as part of your estate. Now, very important, what can you not nominate a beneficiary on? You can't nominate a beneficiary on a tax-free savings account held on a list platform, like I've mentioned, and very importantly, unit trust investments, as these investments are actually a part of your estate and will be handled through your will. So again, you need to understand who the beneficiary nomination is on the investments, but also for some investments, there is no beneficiary nomination, and then your will come into play.
Now, Tiaan, you make such a good point around retirement funds as well. We know that the retirement fund trustees are telling us that the majority of queries that are coming through the internal arbitrator is around beneficiary nominations versus financial dependence. So very important to note. But let's get down to the brass tacks. What is in it for the client?
I think, Dave, the most important thing about a beneficiary nomination is that beneficiary nominations allows the person who's deceased to ensure that their wishes are accurately reflected on their investments, and it prevents any confusion when it comes to administering their investments or their estate upon their passing. Additionally, it's also very important that a client with their financial planner meet regularly to make sure that they update their beneficiary nominations, specifically after major life events like marriage or divorce or even the birth of a child. Because now you might have 2 or 3 kids that are financially dependent on you, and you want to make sure that if there aren't any other spouses, that that's reflected in the beneficiary nominations. And then I think also there's a potential significant benefit specifically on retirement funds, where beneficiary nominations can ensure that you don't pay any estate duty or executors fees if you have a beneficiary nominated on retirement funds, because then they don't form part of your estate, which means there's no estate duty level, and there's also no executors fees.
Okay, so Tiaan, you've covered the intricacies of nominating beneficiaries on different investment products, and that's obviously very beneficial to know. But what is the impact of not nominating beneficiaries?
That's such a great and important question, Dave, and I've alluded to it a little bit earlier in the earlier question. Let's consider those investment types that I spoke about earlier. I'll leave life cover and buy and sell policies and those kind of policies out for now. Let's just focus on investments. Now, firstly, the big benefit of retirement funds, both pre and post retirement funds, is that they are not subject to estate duty or executors fees. So for pre retirement funds and living annuity investments, where there is no beneficiary nominated, or maybe the person passed away that was the original beneficiary on the investment, the full amount of that investment will form part of the client's estate and be subject to executors fees. So if you thought about a practical example, let's assume we have a client at Old Mutual Wealth and they have a living annuity investment of 10 million Rand, and there is no beneficiary nomination, or the original beneficiary nomination has predeceased the client. On that 10 million, it could mean that this person has potentially lost, all their beneficiaries, 2.4 million to estate duty and executors fees, if we assume 20% rate for estate duty and roughly 4% for executors fees. And this ultimately means, Dave, that there is a reduced amount of benefit that will go to their loved ones. Now, not having a beneficiary also removes the flexibility of decision making for your loved ones. As an example, let's consider again the living annuity investment, which many of our clients are invested into. The beneficiary can usually opt to either take a lump sum in cash and receive the after tax payment, or they can say they want to leave the money in the living annuity investment and receive a regular income, or even convert to a life annuity. Now, when there's not a beneficiary nomination, the lump sum is automatically taxed, and the after tax proceeds is then paid into the estate, and then the executor also has to deal with it, which means there's also an executor fee applicable. For endowments and sinking funds, no executors fees are levied on these investments where there is a beneficiary nominated and the money is paid over directly to the beneficiaries. However, in the absence of this, not having a beneficiary, the funds are paid out to the estate, and again, executors fees of up to 4% can be charged. So let's say again, I've got a 10 million Rand endowment or sinking fund investment. That means that I could be forfeiting 400,000 Rand in executors fees. And not just that, furthermore, on sinking funds, there could also be capital gains tax implications triggered when the investment is paid out, when there is not an appointed beneficiary that takes over ownership of the investment, provided that the beneficiary is classified in the same way as you are for tax purposes. So, and I think apart from that, if you ignore the estate duty implications, the executors fees, one also needs to consider that the funds are paid into the estate when there is no beneficiary nomination, which normally takes much longer to wind up when they're paid over straight to a beneficiary in a couple of months. So normally an estate in our country can take anywhere from 12 months to 24 months. We've seen even estates take longer to wind up, where if you have a beneficiary nomination, it gets paid over to the beneficiary in a much more timely manner, which significantly simplifies the administration of your investments upon your passing.
Yeah, and also, we've traveled the country extensively and dealt with clients, spoken to clients as well around estate planning. And something that came up quite often is that not a lot of clients are aware that you can actually nominate secondary beneficiaries. More often than not, spouses tend to travel together, do things together, and it doesn't stop just with the beneficiary. There is almost a stopgap or a safety net that can be put on the investment contract as a secondary beneficiary. Expand on that.
David, such an important point. It's almost something we become evangelical about. If you look at living annuities, tax-free savings accounts, endowments, and sinking funds, you can nominate secondary beneficiaries on all of these, and we strongly urge and encourage clients to do this, or just to even check who your existing beneficiaries are and maybe start nominating secondary beneficiaries. Now, there are several reasons as to why nominating a secondary beneficiary is as important as nominating a primary beneficiary, because I think first and foremost, I think since specifically 2020, we've seen that life can be unpredictable and we need to prepare for unforeseen events such as simultaneous death of a client and their beneficiary. But there are other reasons such as why we think it's important to nominate a secondary beneficiary as a contingency plan where the primary beneficiary maybe predeceases the client can't be located. We see that a lot. A client does not want to accept these benefits, maybe because of a strenuous relationship, or where we just actually have clients that aren't eligible to inherit the funds that they've been nominated to receive. So it's important to mention, Dave, that we allow clients at Old Mutual Wealth to nominate secondary beneficiaries at not just at Old Mutual Wealth, but also Old Mutual International. However, and it's important to note, for pre-retirement funds, your retirement annuities, preservation funds, pension funds, you actually cannot nominate a secondary beneficiary. Therefore, it is extremely important that you sit alongside your financial planner and you regularly review the beneficiaries on your pre-retirement funds.
Okay, so Tiaan, I'm a client. I've taken everything you've said on board and I've realized the importance of nominating beneficiaries on my investments, or whether I have at all. Now, you're so good at making things practical and tangible. Where do clients who are with Old Mutual Wealth or Old Mutual International go and see who their beneficiaries are on their investment contracts?
Well, Dave, as a technology first business, and we spent a lot of money into improving our platforms both locally and internationally. But for planners who have clients invested in our local investments at Old Mutual Wealth or Old Mutual Unit Trust, they can log into the Old Mutual Wealth and Unit Trust Secure Planner website and download a client portfolio summary for their prospective clients. You can also nominate, or they could help their clients nominate a new beneficiary or update existing beneficiary details right here on the planner portal. But as you're aware, Dave, we are still the biggest offshore platform in the country through Old Mutual International. So for our financial planners who manage direct offshore investments on behalf of clients with Old Mutual International, they can log into our OMI planner portal and go to the particular client and then select plan parties, and that will show them who the beneficiaries are for these Old Mutual International contracts as well. So on the local website, you can use the Wealth and Unit Trust Planner website. And for OMI, you can log into the OMI portal and then see, first of all, who your client's beneficiaries are, but also secondly, go ahead and nominate secondary beneficiaries, which your clients can then electronically approve on our local platform.
Thanks again, Tiaan. You've covered a lot of ground with beneficiaries and the nominating of beneficiaries on investment contracts, and it's a really good subject that we want to expand on further. Join us again for another Old Mutual Wealth Debrief Exchange.